evening and welcome to ICAS Winter Symposium Libertas 2023. I'm Shinja Kim, the President and Chair of ICAS, and thank you everyone for joining our program today. It is with my great pleasure that I introduce our special guest speaker, Admiral Mike Gilday, who will address the issues and challenges facing the Korean Peninsula and the U.S. national security. Admiral Mike Gilday is the son of a Navy sailor, surface warfare officer. He is native of Lowell, Massachusetts, and a graduate of the US Naval Academy. He holds a master's degree from Harvard Kennedy School and the National War College. He commanded Destroyer Squadron 7, serving as Sea Combat Commander for the Ronald Reagan Carrier Strike Group. As a flag officer, he served as Commander Carrier Strike Group 8, embarked abroad, USS Dwight Eisenhower, and as Commander U.S. Fleet Cyber Command. His joint assignments include Executive Assistant to a Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Naval Aide to the President, and he served in joint positions as Director of Operations for NATO's Joint Force Command Lisbon, as Chief of Staff for Naval Striking and Support Forces at NATO. He has served on teams that have been recognized with numerous awards and is the recipient of Defense Distinguished Service Medal, Defense Superior Service Medal 4 awards, and 3 awards of Legion of Merit, Bronze Star, Navy and Marine Corps Communication Medal, and the Combat Action Ribbon. Admiral Gilday began serving as the 32nd Chief of Naval Operations on August 22, 2019. Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to have Admiral Gilday here with us today and hope you enjoy the program, and let's welcome Admiral Gilday. Thank you.
Madam President Kim, thank you for that kind introduction. I appreciate your gracious words, and I'm humbled by the invitation to speak to this impressive group of scholars and policymakers tonight. Good evening from Washington, D.C., or I should say good morning to all of you attending from across the Pacific. Since others are giving their weather report, it is a pleasant 12 degrees Celsius here in Washington, 53 degrees Fahrenheit. Quite nice for this time of year. Thanks for tuning in tonight for the discussion. I've been looking forward to this conversation all week. My friend, my dear friend, the former Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral John Greenert, highlighted the piercing intellect of this group and the weight that ICAS carries in policy discussions on all matters that affect the peninsula. Again, I'm so grateful to participate in this discussion, and if you have any tough questions, I'm going to defer those to Admiral Greenert. I'd like to spend the majority of the time that we have together in discussion and answering any questions you may have. I know that there are a lot of experts in the room, so I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts and what I'm sure will be a robust conversation. To start, I want to reaffirm the watertight relationship that the United States and the ROK Navy share. This alliance and this close relationship between our naval forces remains the linchpin of security in Northeast Asia. For about 7 decades, this alliance has provided a stabilizing and a deterring presence, assuring a free and open Indo-Pacific. And there should be no doubt, our commitment to the defense of the Republic of Korea remains ironclad. This past June, the ROK's Maritime Task Flotilla 7 combined forces with the United States Navy Carrier Strike Group 5 in the Philippine Sea. Our combined Carrier Strike Group exercise 2022 showcased our Navy's joint capability to come together, to integrate forces, and to sail like like-minded allies with a common commitment to security and stability of a free and open Indo-Pacific region. I visited and was particularly impressed by the flotilla's amphibious assault ship, Morado. This vessel provides an opportunity for integration and interoperability in joint missions and in crisis response. The United States holds its relationship with the Republic of Korea in the utmost highest regard. We recognize that the region's stability and peace depend upon this unbreakable military alliance. And today, this alliance has evolved into something much more robust. We now share a comprehensive strategic relationship. We're united by more than military might. Our countries are intertwined through economic interests and the pursuit of prosperity. We're also working together across a wide range of scientific and technological fields to empower our people and to inspire the next generation. Now, we recognize the Indo-Pacific faces an array of challenges brought by the climate crisis, and also we need to keep an eye on climate solutions. For a free, peaceful, and prosperous Indo-Pacific region, we must sustain a united front to tackle the challenges of this century together. As evidenced by President Biden's visit to Seoul in May and Vice President Harris's trip to the DMZ in September, the Republic of Korea remains one of our nation's highest international priorities. Leadership in Washington and the meetings that I attend consistently reiterates that our alliance is the linchpin for peace and prosperity in a free and open region. And President Biden has made clear, and even in recent speeches, that the United States will not hesitate to fulfill its extended deterrence commitment to the ROC by using the full spectrum of U.S. defense capabilities, and that extends to nuclear, conventional, and also missile defense. In November of this past year, I visited with my good friend and counterpart, Admiral Lee. I was humbled by his hospitality and reminded of the importance of person-to-person relationships that unite our nations. We also met in Tokyo at the Western Pacific Maritime Security Conference, actually in Yokohama. Admiral Lee and I discussed further opportunities to integrate forces and build upon our trilateral relationship with the Japanese Maritime Defense Force. We both recognize that this must continue to be a forward-looking relationship and partnership that supports all of our common interests and our values. And about that trilateral relationship, I personally feel that it is no longer a luxury for us, but it is a necessity, given the challenges that we face together in the region. I also traveled down to Busan and met with Vice Admiral Kang, commander of the ROC Fleet. With 300 American sailors stationed at the Busan Naval Base and our aircraft carriers again making visits to the port, the United States has a deeply vested interest in supporting and ensuring the safety of the peninsula. For a visit that was otherwise perfectly peaceful, the specter of the rogue regime to the north hung over all of our meetings. November 2022 happened to be Kim Jong-un's busiest month for missile launches. But that did not deter our visit. The United States continues to seek a peaceful diplomatic solution as we pursue complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. All the while, as stated in our recent national defense strategy, any nuclear attack by North Korea against the United States or its allies and partners is unacceptable and will result in the end of that regime. And the United States Navy stands ready to support this strategy with its full complement of assets steaming above and below the waters of the region. As our nations pursue peace, the United States Navy remains ready to deter conflict and, if necessary, prevail in combat. Should our adversaries test our resolve, we will stand shoulder to shoulder with our allies and partners in peace and in war. With that, it is an honor to represent the United States Navy tonight and share my perspective, and I look forward to our conversation. Madam President Kim, I am ready for your questions.
Thank you, Admiral. Before we get into Q&A, let me make a small announcement. ICAS is not an agent of any government or foreign principals. There's no foreign funds involved in the ICAS activities. Thank you. Bennett.
Yes,
Bruce
sir.
Bennett? Okay, go ahead.
I am here. The U.S. Navy does freedom of navigation operations in many sensitive ocean areas around the world. But I've seen few freedom of navigation operations announced as occurring in the Yellow Sea, or as the Koreans call it, the West Sea, in recent years, and in particular in the northern part of the Yellow Sea. Am I just missing this, or is that what's happening? And if so, are we ceding the Yellow Sea to the Chinese?
Yeah, to your last question, I would say no, we're not ceding it. I would say that those opportunities to conduct FONOPS or freedom of naval navigation exercises or operations, they're considered very carefully with the current geopolitical situation, any discussions going on, any negotiations that might be ongoing, tensions that might be high, or the potential for tensions to increase. And so I think we consider those very carefully. I wouldn't say that we back away from the LOC. And although I don't want to predict where we're going to operate next, I don't think that Operation Zero off the table.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Bruce. General Gregson. Chip, go ahead.
The alphabet pretty quickly there. Thank you. Admiral, great to see you, and thank you for giving us your Thursday evening there in Washington.
Good to see you, sir.
As you're painfully aware, there continues to be a dispute over the utility and the effectiveness of the carrier air wing, mainly due to the range. The ranges involved and the massive Chinese arsenal. I know you've been making a lot of changes on the mix of airplanes aboard the aircraft carriers. Can you explain or shed some light on number one, survivability, number two, the ability to deliver effective ordnance on target?
Sure. So in terms of increasing the range of the carrier-based air wing, we're doing a couple of things right now. One is that we have a new drone called the MQ-25 Stingray, and the MQ-25 actually extends the combat radius of the wing about 500 miles. It takes that refueling mission away from 3 strike fighters, let's say, that would and it returns them to their conventional role as strike fighters. And so that's one measure by which we're extending the range. That we expect that capability to go to its initial operating capability IOC in 2025. We are working very deliberately towards that. And one of the reasons why that effort is so important is because for us, the MQ-25 is really the pathfinder for us for that manned-unmanned integration we're going to see at the end of this, I think, at the end of this decade and into the 2030s as we begin to invest more in unmanned. And the path that we want to be on, sir, is to put us in a place by the mid to late 2030s where 40% of the air wing is manned and 60% is unmanned. So that MQ-25, besides being able to push the range out, also has that is also again that trailblazer for us as we refine our ConOps for manned-unmanned teaming. The other thing that we're doing is we're making heavy investments in weapons with range and speed. So long-range weapons that can give us the ability to reach out and touch. With respect to survivability, we're really talking about maneuver. We're talking about deception. We're talking about use of stealth. We're talking about the ability to move around fairly quickly. There are elements in other domains, I'll just say, at a classified level that we try to leverage in order to give us more maneuverability. Some still criticize the carrier and say that it's unsurvivable, but my retort to that would be it's still the most survivable airfield we have. That if I would take a land-based airfield that was really targeted when the lava cooled if we have an aircraft carrier, off the coast of the United States, one day, well, let me just draw the parallel to Reagan National Airport. So tomorrow evening or tomorrow morning your time, it'll be in the same place. But if it were an aircraft carrier, it could be down south off the coast of Florida. It could be off the coast of Canada. Or if it could actually go west, it would be across the Mississippi River into the state of Missouri. So that kind of maneuverability, we think, still gives us a leg up. We've seen the Chinese still do have, or the PRC still does have a challenge keeping track on us closely. I'm not saying that they won't close that gap because they will. We continue to refine the tools in our toolkit to make us more survivable.
Thank you. Tong Kim, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Admiral, for doing this for us. It's very informative. And now I have some comments and also a question. My comments are relevant to North Korea. And I think denuclearization of North Korea is a dream, and it's not possible anymore. And although United States and South Korea hold the ultimate objective on the Korean Peninsula to denuclearize North Korea, but I don't think that's going to happen because there is no efforts to pursue dialogue unless denying North Korea as a nuclear state is one thing that has a political significance, but nevertheless militarily, in terms of the security, that's a very unstable situation. Now, South Korean President Yoon believes that you can keep negative peace by building military deterrent. Now, there is two sides of the efficacy of a deterrent. Deterrent is to deter the enemy, in this case North Korea, from launching aggression against South Korea, not to mention North Korean nuclear weapons. Now, there is a fine line between deterrent and also encouraging North Koreans to even beef up their own military capabilities. More importantly, it's going to be even severe and more intensive arms race between North and South. And there's no way of a peaceful resolution that in public statements that South Korea and the United States are still pursuing, and I don't see that's happening. Now, my question is, President Yoon said South Korea can even have its own nuclear weapons or redeploy tactical nuclear weapons from the United States because they don't have tactical nuclear weapons stored for redeployment themselves, because we have withdrawn them a long time ago. Now, question is, and then he said the South Korea should work with the United States to strengthen the efficacy of extended deterrent. There was a time nuclear umbrella was enough to justify the deterrent impact on North Koreans. But nowadays, extended deterrent, we include strategic assets and other capabilities as well. Now, he says he will strengthen through the discussion and joint operation of U.S. Nuclear forces or nuclear assets. Now, South Korea doesn't have any nuclear assets. Now, how would you see that kind of discussion can arise and proceed between two allies, South Korea and the United States?
Is your question with respect to whether or not I think South Korea should pursue a nuclear capability? Is that what you're asking?
Well, that's part of it. Well, he corrected himself. He does not want to pursue the nuclear weapons by South Korea itself, but this is a time now to pursue discussion of strategic assets and capabilities as a part of the efforts to strengthen the extended deterrent?
Well, when we talk about extended deterrence, I think there's a couple of additional areas besides the traditional domains of air, sea, and land that we work very closely together on, and that would be space and cyber. And so I think our continued discussions, our continued collaboration, and demonstrations that we are working to gain more combined or joint efficiencies or effectiveness in multi-domain operations are again giving North Korea a different view, perhaps, of the alliance and what we might bring to bear. Again, forcing them to call into question whether today is the day for them to make a potential move. I also think that if I go back to the trilat with the Japanese Self-Defense Force, I think my hat's off to President Yoon for leaning forward, along with Prime Minister Kishida, to try and bring those forces together more closely to work through some of the historic differences. I also think that not only is a deterrent against North Korea, or causes North Korea to question their viability in any kind of action against a trilateral alliance, but I also think that it gives the PRC a view that they've never had before from Northeast Asia. So I remain an optimist that we continue to refine and mature and build upon what we have in multi-domain operations. Also, I think the economic is also one of those elements of national security for our countries, for the trilat, that is incredibly strong and extends well beyond the region in terms of its influence. And so I remain an optimist that the deterrent effect of our nations together is effective.
Thank you. David Lee, please.
I seem to be coming down with a cold, so I apologize in advance. Thank you so much, Admiral, for your insight and being here today. Just a quick question.
Sure.
Are you concerned at all that, as mentioned earlier, President Yoon's apparent willingness to pursue increased military presence, including potential nuclear proliferation in the South, combined with Japan committing to strengthening its military cooperation with the U.S., represents an undesirable trend in policy in the area that may eventually need to be scaled back? Or do you think such posture has simply become inevitable given historical trends and current events?
Well, in terms of the nuclear capability, I'm not going to presume that that's really a national decision of the Republic of Korea, and so I prefer not to opine on that. I've already talked about what I think about the effectiveness of the multi-domain conventional aspects and how that would continue to be helpful. I think your question has more to do, if I read you correctly, David, is that we have to be careful about while we're trying to deter, not to be escalatory, not to be recklessly escalatory. And I think that we have done that. And so the first question I had was about the LOC. We know that's a hot button, right? And so if we do go there, it has to be purposeful. It has to be messaged correctly, and we have to understand what effect that we're trying to achieve. And the effect just can't be that we're trying to rub somebody's nose in it or we're trying to poke somebody in the eye. It has to be deliberate and well thought out. It has to be responsible. And so one of the things I think that the trilateral alliance is trying to show North Korea is that we are responsible and we are taking deliberate steps. We're not being provocative. The carrier strike group operations we've done most recently with the ROC Navy have been very conservative, I think, but very high end. And so we're showing them, hey, look, the Republic of Korea Navy has come a long way in terms of exceeding I think where they thought they would be in the exercises that we're conducting. And I think that North Korea gets a view of that. So I think that my take is that we're trying to be responsible. We're not trying to be too provocative. And we're trying to ensure that we're not escalatory, but that we're holding the line. We've seen what Kim Jong-un can do. We see how reckless he can be. That doesn't necessarily mean that we would match that, we would match that kind of behavior.
Thank you, Admiral. William King, are you there?
Sir, I am, and unfortunately, my camera does not seem to be consistently working. First of all, Sir Admiral Gilday, thank you for coming out and joining us tonight. You mentioned earlier about the necessity for regional security and the urgency behind the trilateral security agreements between Japan, South Korea, U.S., and others in the region. That has been a sticking point in the past. The U.S. has had bilateral security agreements. How do you see North Korea and China's aggressive activities here in the last 12 months sort of being a catalyst to revisit the trilateral security agreement, better information sharing and target acquisition for threats in the area?
Yeah, that's so you're making the point, William. That's my point exactly. Is that it's no longer a luxury; it's really a necessity, and that I think drives Japan and the Republic of Korea to get beyond some of the behavior that we've seen, where you're poking each other in the eye, and it isn't necessarily helpful with respect to the posture against either North Korea or PRC. And I don't mean to be too critical here. I know that there's a lot of history there that I don't have a deep understanding of, and so I don't mean to trivialize it. But I do think for the defense of the peninsula, for the stability of the region, that there is now a new standard that we have to elevate to, if not for our generation, for the next generation. And so I think it's time to evolve. At a personal level, and this is why these personal relationships are absolutely critical, where you have a chief of defense from each of our countries in such close contact, where you have heads of Navy that meet privately together to ensure our relationships are grounded on trust, so that together we can work through perhaps some of those trivial issues, right? When there was a Republic of Korea ship that was in an exercise, and the Japanese were offended by the name of the ship, and so they wouldn't let the ship in the exercise, or because in another event, the Japanese ships were flying a certain flag, and the Republic of Korea wouldn't let those ships participate in the exercise. I think those are examples that we need to get beyond to serve the greater good, the higher purpose that we all probably could agree that we need to aim for. So I hope I answered your question okay, Mr. King.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you. David Maxwell. David.
Thank you, Dr. Kim, and thank you, Admiral. We appreciate you enlightening us tonight. I'd like to shift gears a little bit. I focus on Korea, but also on irregular warfare, and so I'm interested in if you could describe how you envision the Navy competing with in the irregular warfare space and the strategic competition, the gray zone, particularly with China and its unrestricted warfare and its three warfares. If you have any insights on that, and then I'll follow up next question then. Go ahead. Sir.
Okay, what I'd say this about our unconventional forces. So with respect to Navy SEALs, we have pivoted that element of the Navy back to its frogman roots. And so seabed warfare is something that is incredibly important. There are vulnerabilities here for all of us, right? 99% of our internet traffic travels in transoceanic cables. And so from an economic standpoint, there's a lot of vulnerability there. There's risk and there's interest that we need to protect. And so our Navy SEALs are operating much more closely with our submariners. And so we have pivoted them from a predominantly counter-extremist focus to more of a maritime focus, more to what they were designed to do originally during the Cold War. With respect to let's see, what was your other question?
Well,
I'm
competing
sorry,
with China in unrestricted warfare, and its three warfares. I mean, that's really that competition with
gray zone.
the Navy operating in the gray zone.
So with respect to the gray zone, I think the most important thing that we can do is to expose PRC or Russian malign activity. And so in order to do that, you got to be out there, and you can't just be forward. You actually have to be in the way. And I don't mean that in too provocative a sense, but you have to be there in the South China Sea. You got to be there, in the East China Sea. You got to be in the Taiwan Strait. You have to be present, and you have to be able to shine a spotlight on things like illegal fishing, let's say, off the coast of Vietnam or the Philippines. The things that they do that the Chinese might do to shoulder ships out there, merchant ships, and bully other countries. We need to expose that activity for what it is. It's not consistent with international norms that have served, all that since the Bretton Woods Conference and before that, those international norms have been the tide that billions have benefited from. And so, probably giving you a long answer to a short question, but essentially exposing their activity and trying to hold them accountable in an international forum.
I couldn't agree more, sir. It's really recognize their strategy, understand it, expose it, and attack it with a superior political warfare strategy. So thank you, sir.
Right.
I agree 100%.
And one thing I'll say about as I'm traveling to Paris next week, and there's a maritime conference in Paris. Recently, I attended one in Italy probably 4 or 5 months ago. I mentioned the one in Yokohama most recently in November. They no longer just have a regional focus. They've all transitioned from a regional to a trans-regional focus. So you have global attendance at these symposiums. Singapore was another one last year that I attended. And so I think to your point, Mr. Maxwell, what you see is like-minded nations and like-minded navies coming together. I know that some out there might have Air Force roots or Army roots. So please, I say this with all due respect, but armies meet in war. Navies and our Marines out there, we work with allies and partners every single day. It's part and parcel of what we do. And we operate not just in the if we consider the dime, not just the military lane, but also the economic and the diplomatic. And to many of the points that were made here this evening, that's kind of a powerful mixture when you think about it in terms of like-minded nations coming together with a sense of solidarity and purpose and rowing together out there. So thanks.
Okay, thank you, David. Okay, Nobuo, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Admiral. It was very good exposure and explanation. My question is about the future Japan-US collaboration. The Prime Minister Kishida is now in town, I guess, and discussing about the further collaboration in the security. And that is a really great change that Japan is going to make in this administration. I'm fully appreciative of what we are going to do. And my question to you, sir, is that I'm always asking this question to Admiral Harris some time ago, and also to Dennis Blair. Should Japan have a nuclear propulsion submarine? We have a lithium-ion battery, let's say, submarine, which you are not using for the man, let's say, operation. It's only non-man operation possible for such submarines. But if we think to use the Tomahawks for the, let's say, counterattack, I think regular submarine or the nuclear propulsion submarine is probably much more suited to the future, let's say, defense. And China is definitely moving beyond the first sea lane into the second, and that means Japan should more focus not only north and east of Japan, but to the south, and much wider and larger and fast operation of the submarine is definitely required. I think, I mean, Japan, at this moment, Japan is not a member of AUKUS for Australia, but if we think about the Pacific Ocean and the future threat, I think we have to have the nuclear submarine collaboration. And Japan, US, I mean, METI Minister Nishimura visited recently to the Washington and agreed with Granholm, the Secretary of Energy, about the development of the advanced nuclear system, but it's not including any kind of naval application like submarine. So what do you think about the future collaboration about the nuclear submarine between Japan and the United States?
I think that is a monumental step. I would, if I were, I have not talked to my Japanese counterpart, Admiral Sakai, about this at all. But if I did provide any advice, I would first become educated on the totality of the ecosystem that's required for any kind of nuclear propulsion activity. I would tell you, sir, that it is immense. And while AUKUS may look attractive, I've said publicly that I believe that it will be well into the 2040s before the Australians can indigenously produce their own submarine. That is a significant investment, and I mean significant, of national treasure in order to put yourself in a position where you can have the right people, the right platform, the right platform or platforms, the right trainings, training facilities, the right sustainment capabilities for a nuclear force, the right workforce in order to do that. You have to own it from cradle to grave. That includes any nuclear waste from those vessels. And so I'm just saying that it is a monumental step. What I might consider that among other options. Of course, you have diesel submarines now, and by the way, they're excellent. I would tell you world class. I would also consider a deeper discussion of unmanned. So our Navy is making significant investments in unmanned vessels, and this is at an unclassified level that will have a clandestine mine laying capability. Think about that. I mean, the point that I'm trying to make is, to what effect do you want any kind of platform, any kind of capability, and how are you going to potentially employ that? And the other thing is how long do you want to? If it's a nuclear capability, it's just going to take a long time. I hope I've given you a few things to think about. It's just, I don't mean to be too negative. It's just a significant step to do that. In fact, there's some days that I sit and I look in amazement at our nuclear enterprise in the United States Navy, and I think to myself, if we had to start today from nothing, how long would it take us to do it? I'm sure that we could do it, but it would be an enormous investment. It would be a significant portion of our defense budget to get that capability where you need it. So there'd be sacrifices, big trade-offs.
Thank you very much. I think, Japan has increased defense expenditure. So this is a great opportunity. If we are going to the nuclear submarine, this is the time. And I know that there's no public discussion or in the government discussion when we discuss about the future defense policy. There's no mentioning and no consideration about the nuclear. It's some part in the mind of some of the people, but not really discussed. So this is the problem.
I also think, well, you really hit an important point, and that is the nation has to be behind it, because this will be a decades-long path. And if you want to keep it on track and keep that investment strategy going forward across multiple administrations of different political parties,
Right.
it's that'd be quite a dance.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Nobu.
Welcome.
Brett Linden.
Hey,
Brad?
thanks.
Linden,
Yeah,
go
right
ahead.
here. Yeah, thank you, Admiral Brad London from CNN, and thanks for doing this today.
Sure.
My question is what role is there for both South Korea and Japan to play in any defense of Taiwan should the PRC move on the island?
So I'll just say I don't want to talk about any kind of contingency plans, but I would say that the closer that we work together, the stronger that we become, and the stronger I think trilateral face that we show the PRC and that would show North Korea is really important to stabilize things. I would hope that we never get into a point where we have a conflict, and that would be really the primary point of our coming closer together, is that deterrence front that would hopefully, with strong will and strong capability, convince any potential adversary that it's not worth it to make a move. I can't, those are national decisions in terms of who would do what when, and so it is a hypothetical. But I think that we should continue to march in the direction we're marching right now, and we shouldn't be deterred, and we shouldn't lose our nerve in terms of what it takes for all of us to come together, work through differences, and improve.
Okay. William King, go ahead.
Hey, Admiral, when we're looking into Asia, particularly around the Korea's peninsula, weapons of mass destruction seems to be one of the things that's most predominant in discussions in the politics and the view. North Korea has done extensive testing in the past, and then it's taken a pause, and we saw some engagements and the recognition of trying to reduce, focus at the nuclear level, but trying to reduce and eliminate their weapons of mass destruction capability. More recently, Kim Jong-un has talked about he considers himself a self-declared nuclear power and wants the recognition of that. As he starts to revisit and re-energize that program, at what point do we fully engage, or at what point do we not? And how do we convince China to be part of the solution in trying to contain his exploration in nuclear power?
Well, one can only hope that their interests with respect to a denuclearized peninsula are the same as our own, for reasons that are close to home. And so I'm not sure, Mr. King, that I'd say a lot more than that. I think it's difficult for me, or really impossible for me, to understand exactly how they're thinking about DPRK's behavior. They do say that they don't have any control over it. I'm not sure that that's completely true. I'm sure that they have some influence. But one would hope that over time, and there have been times in history where, outliers have come back into the fold, and one would hope, with respect to the PRC and this specific problem, which is DPRK, that they would join other like-minded nations. This would be one area, one would think, where we can work together constructively. I hope that's helpful.
David Maxwell, do you have follow-up question?
Yes, thank you.
Go ahead.
Admiral, you've talked a lot about a lot of good things about trilateral cooperation with the ROC, Japan, and U.S. One area that seems to be emerging is integrated missile defense. The ROC and Japan just announced perhaps real-time sharing of targeting information. I wonder if you could talk from a Navy perspective on integrated missile defense, the importance of Aegis and SM-6 and all of that, and how you would envision integrated missile defense with Korea, Japan, and the U.S.
Yeah, I think the first hurdle is having systems that can actually talk to each other and exchange data in a useful way. And so you have three nations that have the same type of weapon systems and combat systems on their ships. And so that first hurdle is really resolved. The Japanese Self-Defense Force just did an SM-6 shot with a couple of their ships off of our missile range off of Kauai in Hawaii. Very, very impressive, high-end operation that they conducted flawlessly. The South Koreans had that same kind of high-level competency. And so, again, I think we're on the right track here, where I think everything that you described is in the realm of the possible. I think that we can do it together. I think we can do it responsibly. I think that the crews, as I go aboard those ships, and I've been aboard ships in the JMSDF, and the same thing with the ROC Navy, the degree of professionalism when you go aboard those ships is uplifting. I mean, it really gives you a lot of confidence in terms of how far we've come. And I remember, as a lieutenant, doing bilateral exercises. I know that was a long time ago, but that's when you go back and you think about your sea stories and where you've been, it's a different Navy. This isn't the same. We're not at the same levels that we were way back then when we could barely talk on the radio. It is truly impressive. I think we're on the precipice here of something really important, and that's why I said we shouldn't lose our nerve, but we shouldn't lose sight of what's really important here as we move forward. I think that we in a phrase I would say don't self-limit, and that's what I try to tell our folks, and we work together really, really closely. And I think everything that you described with respect to being able to share targeting data, technically feasible, and oh boy, is it operationally relevant, and be happy to move in that direction.
Thank you. Chip, go ahead.
Yeah, now that I've gotten rid of the FAA,
Good. The microphone is back.
the microphone now. I wanted to go back to where we were when my system failed. In 1950, when North Korea invaded South Korea, one of the Navy's very early missions was to get down to Taiwan and protect Taiwan from mainland China. I think we can see, if we go to or approach a conflict in Asia, I think we have to be mindful that any conflict in Asia, regardless of whether it starts in Taiwan or Korea or in the northern islands of Japan, is likely to soon go everywhere in Asia. Mm-hmm. And we all need to, number one, contribute to three-way deterrence as much as we can, but also be thinking that conflicts that start in one place and are not totally guaranteed to stay in that one place, which makes for another set of defensive decisions. Thank you.
I think those are great comments, General. And I just add on to it or amplify what you just said. I mentioned in my formal remarks earlier about the carrier exercise that we did with the ROC flotilla, and we did that in the Philippine Sea. We're working with the Japanese Self-Defense Force in the Gulf of Aden. So those are just a couple of examples, but there are more where we're not just confined, to Northeast Asia. We're well beyond, and I think the bilateral relationships extend beyond, and that's why I see great promise in moving in that direction with the trilat. I know that both Admiral Aquilino at Indo-PACOM and Admiral Paparo at Pacific Fleet share my thinking.
Sungjae Park. Sungjae,
Yes.
go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you very much to give it to me opportunity. Also, I agree with you that Yellow Sea, it will be very important to showing to North Korea and China collect message. But recently, North Korea tried to get the fuel product from the Yellow Sea near the Nampo port. So what is your message to them? Let them just illegally working against United Nations sanction or U.S. sanction, or what message you want to give to them?
Well, certainly we've exposed that activity, certainly we have physically interrupted some of those illicit fuel transfers. So that's something that's ongoing. They're not going to stop doing that because they're desperate. And so what they'll end up doing is transferring fuel illegally in PRC territorial waters, as an example. And so that's where you'll see them seek sanctuary to continue to do that kind of illicit activity. And then again, back to Mr. Maxwell's comment about how do you confront them in the gray zone? Well, you expose it as best you can, and you leverage international legal levers if they're there to pull in order to hold them accountable. Sometimes that's, and in this case, sometimes that's difficult. But some of the best things we do is, you got to catch them in the act. You got to catch them. You got to have video. So, and then that goes back to through the UN to get litigated in that complicated process. But I think that's something that we can't let up on. We aren't always successful in preventing them because, as I said, it's like squeezing a balloon. They find a way to get away with it, but we can't just give up on it.
Thank you, Admiral. Donald Kirk, go ahead.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I'm at National Airport and I missed part of this discussion, a lot of this discussion. However, I just wanted to ask about the Japanese self-defense force. The Prime Minister of Japan is in Washington talking to President Reagan tomorrow, and I believe the Defense Minister of Japan and our Defense Secretary Austin have been in consultation, and perhaps at a lower level, some more immediately working level people have been talking too. So, what do you think should be done for the Japanese Navy? And if the Japanese defense budget is indeed doubled in the next 5 years, as Mr. Kishida has been saying, what are the priorities? And what would you recommend, and what do you think will happen realistically? Thank you.
The trends that I've seen from the JMSDF have been increased investments in integrated air and missile defense, Aegis type ships. Also, their helicopter carriers are really effective, and I would characterize them as a Swiss Army knife. And so there's so many different things you can do. They're very akin to some of our amphibious ships, where you have troops that are embarked. You can move them ashore in different ways. You have other capabilities on there. You got rotary lift. You got boats that you can use. You got weapon systems, and so those are also very capable. I think high-end utility kind of platforms. So my sense is that the JMSDF is on a very sound trajectory in terms of making investments in the right platforms and the right capabilities to have a capability that can go head to head with PRC if required.
What about fixed wing carriers? Would you recommend them for the Japan Naval Self-Defense Force?
I can't answer that question for them. I'm not sure that that may or may not be the best decision for them. If you take a look at our own amphibious ships, we've got the if you take a look at our amphibs right now, where we've invested in the F-35B that has VSTOL capability, along with the 53 kilo large helicopters, along with MV-22s. And so I think that there are capabilities out there. Again, I wouldn't necessarily just settle on one single solution set in a conversation like this. I would kind of expand the options, the cone of courses, and say, first of all, what do I want to achieve? What do I need these platforms and capabilities for? And then take a look at what a survivable, lethal mix might be. There's an affordability factor that also plays in here, because defense budgets tend to be a bit of a sine wave for all of us. So I don't mean to be evasive in answering your question, Mr. Kirk. I just don't want to answer for the JMSDF on the carrier air wing question, but thanks.
But there are many more questions that spring to mind, including JSDF combining on exercises with the South Koreans and JSDF operating in the South China Sea, et cetera, et cetera. Those are two areas that I won't ask. I promise I won't ask any more follow-up questions, but may I address those questions to you?
To the former, that's already occurred. So when I visited in November, it was just at the heels of a conclusion of a pretty robust anti-submarine warfare exercise for all three navies. South China Sea, it's all within the realm of possibility. I mean, a lot of the answers to those questions are in the political realm, right? In terms of the decisions that have to be made, when and where you want to employ those kind of forces. But the JMSDF have shown a very high level of competency in terms of what they're doing out there in the Western Pacific.
Well, thank you.
Welcome.
Okay. Tong, do you have follow-up question?
Yes, I been listening very carefully to the Admiral, and a lot of the stuff I take as very valuable information. Now, it still bothers me, since there is no solution, where deterrent, beeping up the deterrent would end. I hear you say, by doing all this, the enemy or Kim Jong-un of North Korea finally realize it's going to be suicidal if he take some aggressive action against the South Korea or the United States, even Japan. Now, my question is, where you settle, at which point can you stop and take a pause? Is it enough? Will there be any point where you feel satisfied with what you've been doing in terms of a deterrent? The deterrent is assured. If the deterrence fails, everybody understands, then we have to defeat the aggression. But the war breaks out oftentimes because of miscalculation or some accidental action by one side or the other. But what I'm most concerned about is heightening tension in the tone of rhetoric coming out of Seoul presidential office and the North Korean Kim Jong-un's office as well. They're getting personal to each other, and there's no way they're going to talk to each other for North and South. Yet, U.S. and South Korea say that we will pursue the ultimate goal of denuclearization, which I said earlier. This seems to be impossible unless there will be implosion or explosion, which would be very costly. Whether we have to think of, when you defeat aggression, we have to think of the cost, all the lives and properties and all the things we will lose, and especially there will be nuclear warfare. And it's going to be like we've seen what happened in Chernobyl and Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the residues of destruction will go on the decades. So I'm still concerned about this whole situation, and I hope leadership would have some better solution to persuade the North Koreans and any potential enemies, or Chinese or Russians, so that we can all work together toward peace and a little bit more stability than instability and danger of a war.
No, I think your comments are profoundly important, and I think that we always have to seek a means to speak to each other at the highest levels. And so we also have challenges with countries like Iran that are closed as well, in terms of having, viable open communications with them at a moment's notice when we need it. So sometimes we have to use third parties in order to make it happen, but we have to have some way, I think, to be able to reach out and extend a hand instead of extending a fist, in order to get to an end state that's peaceful and not just driven by ego or a fiery rhetoric. With respect to the escalatory nature of building up deterrent capability, the one thing I'd say, and I just draw a parallel for us, The United States Navy is not going to be able to match the PLAN missile for missile. That would be a waste of money. We're just not going to do that. And so you have to be a bit more creative than that when you think about how you want to present vexing problems to an adversary, how you're going to approach them, in multiple domains simultaneously, from seabed to space, across many vectors, both in the physical and the virtual, and to use all the tools in the toolbox effectively to do that. I also think that the network of allies and partners that we have remains a very important asymmetric advantage for the United States and our like-minded allies like the ROK and Japan. And so I think that you can't just think about deterrence in a two-dimensional fashion. You really have to think about it much broader than that, and be a bit more creative, I think, in terms of what you can bring to bear to cause a potential adversary to question his or her ability to be successful.
Thank you. That was a very good answer. I'm fully satisfied with your response. Thank you.
Thank you.
Don Kirk. Go ahead.
Again, thank you again for letting me ask a question. Admiral, I asked about the South China Sea, that sort of thing. I didn't ask about Taiwan. I'm sure you discussed it earlier. But what about Japanese U.S. naval exercises around Taiwan in response to Chinese exercises? And indeed, what about a carrier in between Taiwan and the Chinese mainland, with planes taking off in response to all those Chinese planes that have been flying around? Is that possible to happen? Pardon the sound in the background. As I said, I'm in the airport. I'm sure my sound off.
Well, I just go back to our earlier discussion, and Mr. Kirk, you might not have been online in our earlier discussions about those kinds of responses or that kind of activity. And my answer back then, earlier in the segment, was that we need to be very thoughtful in terms of the message that we want to give to anybody like the PRC, and not just go head to head with them because we can, or because on any given day they've gotten under our skin. So our campaign, we in the Indo-Pacific, we actually have a campaign plan that we execute on a day-to-day basis that's driven by Indo-PACOM, and it is outcomes focused, specific outcomes focused, in order to get the PRC's attention and to basically send them a message with respect to different capabilities that we have, different joint capabilities we have operating together, and then based on sometimes how we see them react, intelligence that we might collect, things that we might read, we get a sense of how successful we have been in messaging them in certain ways. So I would just say that it is, in dealing with PRC, we just, and the same thing with DPRK, we just need to be very thoughtful and responsible in terms of how we operate, particularly around Taiwan. So they know that we have the capability to reach out and go head to head with them if we want. They know that we can do that. We have done that before. Our pilots in the past year have gone head to head over the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea against PRC fighters. But it has to be deliberately planned out and thoughtful.
Well, is there any chance of sending a carrier group through the Formosa Straits?
Can you say that again?
Is there any chance of sending a carrier group through the Formosa Straits in between Taiwan and the Chinese mainland? Is that going to happen?
I would tell you that options like that are never off the table. They're never off the table. And I know that you know that. I just won't say that we're absolutely going to do that at any given time. We can definitely do it if we need to do it. And they know that as well.
Thank you.
Okay, Brett Glendon. Brett.
Yes, thanks. Admiral, in that last response there, you mentioned American pilots and Chinese pilots going head to head over around Taiwan and over the South China Sea. Can you give us any more detail on that? How frequently is that happening, and how dangerous is it becoming?
So I would tell you the interactions have been safe and professional. By and large, safe and professional with the PLAN. Yes, they have. We have intercepted each other in that international airspace where we both have not only the ability but the inherent right to operate. And so, it's been when I say going head to head, we've done intercepts, but they've been safe and professional. I don't mean to paint that in any other way. Again, we see the same thing with the Russians in the Eastern Mediterranean, whether it's under the sea, on the sea, or in the air. And so that's just part and parcel of we see it with the IRGCN in the Northern Arabian Gulf. And so those activities happen quite frequently, sometimes almost daily. We take them very seriously, but they're not a show of ego. I will tell you that. We face those situations, and we expect our commanding officers to face them with the highest degree of professionalism. And I'm proud to say that they've shown that day in and day out.
Donald?
Admiral, I hate to harp on the same issue, but there was an incident not long ago when a Chinese plane over the South China Sea came perilously close to an American plane. I don't know if it was a Navy plane or an Air Force plane, but you implied that they're all keeping more than arm's distance, but they seem to have broken this barrier quite recently, and I think it's happened between Chinese and Japanese planes. So. Don't you think that what's going to trigger matters and make them worse? And what are your concerns about that?
So, I think the way I phrased it was by and large. So, not in every single case, and sometimes I can't speak to that specific case in general. I mean specifically in terms of exactly what we saw. I think I remember. I think it might have been an Air Force reconnaissance plane that they came close to, and so sometimes it is a particular pilot in a particular squadron, and so I would be more concerned if I saw that kind of behavior consistently, temporally within a certain time frame, or I would see that repeatedly, in terms of if I would see that kind of those kinds of maneuvers on a more routine basis. But we haven't seen that routinely, and I'm not trying to be evasive. I'm serious. We haven't seen that we haven't seen them. I would not characterize their behavior in the sky or on the sea as irresponsible broadly. There are things that they do that we disagree with. But for the most part, by and large, our interactions have been safe and professional.
Thank you. David Maxwell.
Thank you. Admiral, a little different focus here. Assuming that the Republic of Korea was amenable to this, would you consider home porting any naval vessels in Korea, in say Busan? And would you have the ships to do that? Would you consider doing that? Again, assuming that the Republic of Korea would want that to happen.
I would never take any option off the table. I would tell you that we talked to a lot of nations about the potential to do that. We work very closely with the combatant commanders, in this case, the commander of Indo-PACOM Command, as we would consider those options. I'm not aware of anything on the table right now, Mr. Maxwell, that we've had those kinds of serious discussions. But we'd have to weigh a bunch of different factors, as you know, to make a decision like that. But again, not off the table.
Tong Kim, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm doing fine. I'm just listening and following up what the Admiral has to explain about. And again, very informative. I just hope the military and leaders like Admiral and others in the United States and elsewhere work together very closely. And just for deterrent is good. Just hope it deters a war, outbreak of a war. That's the purpose of a deterrent, I think. Unless if deterrent fails, you have to defeat the aggression. So having said that, I hope there will be someday some changes in North Korea as well. And as I said, I don't see any implosion anytime soon. Of course, an explosion, which will be also risky in terms of the safety and security of the South Korean people. So we are in such a security dilemma. It's not easy. We got to do something about it. At the same time, if we do too much, it could endanger even heighten tension higher, and it could make the situation more dangerous.
Yes.
Thank you, Tom. Sungjae, do you have last word?
Well, actually, so I want to hear from Admiral about so what's we supposed we gave to the message to China and North Korea. I agree with you. So North Korea will be the U.S. and China can cooperate together. But looks to me, China don't want to work with the U.S. right now. So what will be the short message to China and Russia?
Well, I think it's clear that we are competitors, and we have to be, I think, we have to respect each other. And I think that's very important. And we can't let our egos get in the way of what's best for our nations and our national interests. And we do have to hold them accountable, and we have to continue to talk. Dialogue is always good. And there may be areas, I mentioned earlier, there may be areas that we can work together and we can both, we can all benefit from. And I think we ought to look for those opportunities. Not everything has to be a competition. One of the areas that we haven't talked about, and I'm happy to talk about it for a few minutes if you like, is that what we've learned from the current conflict in Ukraine. And there were many different takeaways from that conflict. And who would have thought in 2023 that we'd see a war raging in Eastern Europe? Almost unthinkable, but it's happened. Which I think, to the conversation we had tonight, you can never just assume danger away. And I think we have seen from the Ukrainians an incredible ability to be very agile and to learn the art of war while they're fighting a war, to learn and to adapt very, very quickly. And that's probably the primary message that I talk about when I visit sailors in our Navy, in terms of what they can learn from those young soldiers on the ground in Ukraine, who are doing the best they can with what they have. And the other thing is the will to fight. And we've seen just how important that is. I think that the predictions early on were that, President Zelensky might not stick around very long. And he's turned out to be quite a strong and effective leader for the past year in this conflict. And we thought that maybe, some of his government leaders that might leave or might cut a deal with the Russians, similar to what happened in Afghanistan between the provincial governors and the Taliban. But that didn't happen either. And so the will of the people is such an important variable that you cannot discount. And you can't underestimate just how powerful that cohesiveness and effectiveness can be. I also think that the Russia-Ukraine conflict has been a bellwether in terms of our ability to share high-level intelligence much more effectively than we ever have done in the past. And so, we before the conflict began, we removed strategic surprise from Putin by exposing what he was going to do, right down to taking his tactical surprise away when we actually predicted when he was going to cross the line of departure into the country of Ukraine. We took his ability to use false flag operations away. And so I think the power of information, how we used it, how we shared it, how we shaped international opinion, and actually forged international solidarity behind Ukraine by exposing Russia has been important. I think a key challenge now is, and I think as much as we might complain about our news networks, they are doing a pretty good job of keeping the conflict in Ukraine in the forefront. And I think that's vitally important to us as societies, because we can't lose sight of what's going on over there. We can't, the worst thing that could happen is that we just turn our backs and look the other way. So with that, I'm happy to take any follow-ups on Ukraine or any insights if anybody wants to share. I sure would listen closely.
Brett Linden, go ahead.
Yeah, well, kind of on that line with Ukraine, Admiral Cottle's comments yesterday that the industrial base isn't keeping up with supplying ordnance. What's your opinion on that? Are we having a problem with that? Will we have a problem with that? And I think, Ukraine has shown that there's an ever increasing appetite for ordnance. And can the United States industrial base keep up?
I think one of the things that we've seen in the war in Ukraine is the usage of high-end weapons has been at a much higher rate than we would have thought. And so I think for ourselves, we need to go back and think about, if we do get into a fight, what our potential expenditure rates could be, and whether or not the industrial base can surge fast enough to meet a potential demand. With respect to the things that we're providing to the Ukrainians right now, remember, it is not just the United States. This is a coalition of the willing that come together on a weekly basis and discuss, A, what does Ukraine need? B, there is the risk there in terms of what they're given in terms of being too escalatory, right? And so putting some things into their hands that make them more effective, more combat effective is important. But countries are coming together, taking a look at their own stocks and making, sound decisions in terms of how much they can give. It's working out pretty well right now. I mean, for the past year, when the Russian tanks came across the border, we didn't necessarily give the Ukrainians tanks. We gave them Javelin missiles to knock out the Russian tanks. And so that's an example of approaching a problem set maybe a little bit differently. It doesn't always have to be looked at it two-dimensionally, tit for tat. You can take a different approach. And so I'm really proud of the way nations have come together, how industry has responded. Sure, it's been challenging, and Admiral Cottle highlighted some of the challenges of keeping pace. But I think nations have come together. The teamwork's been really good.
Thank you. Don, go ahead.
Well, there's an airport announcement going on in back of me. But Admiral, I have a question that's on a very different tangent, and you might not really.
Is it going to be an easy question, Don, or a hard question?
It should be easy. But one of the biggest stories concerning the Navy in recent years has been the case of Fat Leonard. What is the Navy doing to make sure such cases cannot happen again? And do you think that those involved in the Fat Leonard incident got the punishment they deserved, or should they have been more severely punished? In some navies, they'd have been in jail for life, but or if they were allowed to live at all. But what's your general view in retrospect about what's being done and what should be done to prevent a recurrence of that kind of episode?
Yeah, so that was quite a gut punch for the United States Navy. And so as military professionals, there are really two pillars that are of utmost importance. The first is professional competency. And so for us to be respected, you would expect that your militaries, whether it's the U.S. military or the JMSDF or the ROK, our countries expect that we are effective and world-class at what we do, number one. The other pillar that's just as important, if not more so, is character. And that's what failed in the Fat Leonard case. And so that's something that we've learned from. There's an accountability piece of that in terms of not looking the other way and letting people off the hook. To your point on accountability and punishment. So some of those cases with those officers, they actually broke the law. And so those cases were handled by the justice system. And so the decisions that were made to incarcerate or not were made, under our court system. There were also other ethical, if there were other cases with Fat Leonard where it might have not have necessarily been lawlessness, but it was what we believe to be ethical violations that didn't meet the standards that we expect as military officers. And this gets to the character piece and what we expect as military professionals. And so those officers were held accountable in other ways. And so some of them received letters of censure where they, some of them lost rank. And so there were things that were done that certainly cost them money, were a stain in their reputation, and unfortunately for some ended their service. But we continue to look at and teach from what we observed in terms of bad behavior during that scandal so that it doesn't happen again. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Admiral. Now time is almost run up, and I, as a moderator, I have a question to you, Admiral.
Okay.
Will the Navy beat the Army next year?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
The Chief Staff of the Army and I are dear friends. 364 days a year. It's just that one day, when we play that football game. But yeah, we've been since the day we lost on December 14th of this year. On December 15th, we started getting ready for the next game. So we're going to take the next one. We're going to take.
That was great game. Congratulations.
It was a great game. It was a great.
Thank you, Admiral. And we'll get back to you. Ladies and gentlemen, time is up. Let's give Admiral a big round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral.
Thank you, gentlemen. I truly appreciate it. It's been an honor to spend some time with you. Thanks for supporting the United States Navy, the JMSDF, the ROK Navy. Thank you very, very much. Thanks for your interest in national security.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes.
All
Take
right.
care.
Time
Bye
is
now.
up. Thank you.
Bye now.